Can you imagine hearing these words from your own father? You're dead to me. Get out and don't come back. Those were the last words my father spoke before he shoved me onto our front porch and slammed the door in my face during a thunderstorm. I was 14 years old. I had no jacket, no phone, no money, just a backpack full of sketchbooks and the clothes on my back, already drenched from the rain hammering down on our neighborhood. 4 hours later, a paramedic found me collapsed in a 7-Eleven parking lot. And when my father got the call from the hospital, he refused to come. He actually told them he didn't have a daughter anymore. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the truth was already starting to surface. And when it did, it would destroy everything my sister had built on her lies.
I'm Jane Griffith.
I'm 28 years old. And this is the story of the night my family threw me away, the storm that almost killed me, and the 14 years it took for me to realize I never needed their forgiveness. They needed mine. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or if you know what it's like when the people who should protect you choose someone else's lies over your truth, subscribe to this channel. You're not alone in this. Welcome to a community that sees you. I knew something was wrong the second I opened the front door. The house smelled like perfume and panic, and there was glass everywhere. Not just a little glass. Everywhere. Shattered teacups from Mom's collection, the porcelain figurines Grandma had given us, even the frame that held Mom's wedding photo. All of it scattered across the living room floor like someone had taken a baseball bat to every surface in the house. Brand was sitting in the middle of it all, mascara running down her face, her hands shaking as she held her phone. When she saw me, her eyes went wide and she scrambled backward like I was holding a weapon. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice cracking in exactly the right places. "How could you do this?" I dropped my backpack by the door and just stared. The jewelry box from Mom's dresser was open on the coffee table, completely empty. The antique necklace Mom wore in every family photo, the pearl earrings she'd planned to give Brand on her wedding day, the sapphire ring that was supposed to be mine when I turned 18, all of it gone. "Brand, what happened? Where's?" "Don't you dare act innocent." She stood up, wobbling a little, and I noticed she'd positioned herself perfectly in front of the broken mirror so she could see her own reflection. She was performing. Even then, some part of me knew she was performing. "Dad's going to be here any minute, and you're going to pay for what you've done." My stomach dropped. I just got home. I was at school until 4, you know that. Mrs. Peterson kept me after 2. "Liar." The word came out as a shriek, and she grabbed one of the broken teacup handles off the floor and threw it at me. It missed, shattering against the wall behind my head. "You've been jealous of me your entire life. You couldn't stand that Dad loves me more, that I'm the one Mom trusted with her things, that I'm the one who actually matters in this family." I heard Dad's truck in the driveway before I could respond. The engine cut off, the door slammed, and Brand's whole face changed. The anger melted into something softer, more broken. She sank down onto the couch and started crying again, these perfect, delicate sobs that made her look about 12 years old. The front door flew open and Dad stood there in his work boots, still covered in sawdust from the construction site. His eyes went from the destruction to Brand's tear-stained face, to me standing there with my backpack still on my shoulders. "Daddy," Brand whispered, reaching for him like a child reaching for safety. "She destroyed everything. Everything Mom left us." I tried to stop her, but she... "You're lying," I said, but my voice came out too quiet, too desperate. Dad looked at me like he'd never seen me before in his life. And in that moment, I realized Brand had won before I'd even walked through the door. Dad didn't even let me grab a jacket. He marched me to the door by my upper arm, his fingers digging in so hard I knew there'd be bruises, and shoved me onto the porch. The rain hit me like a wall of ice water, and I turned back just in time to see his face, red and twisted with something that looked like hatred. "You're dead to me," he said. "Get out and don't come back." The door slammed. I heard the deadbolt click into place. And then I was alone in the storm with nowhere to go. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, pounding on the door and screaming for him to let me back in, but the lights in the living room went off and I knew he wasn't coming. Brand had won. Whatever she'd planned, whatever she'd done, she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. The rain was coming down so hard I could barely see the street. My t-shirt was already soaked through, my jeans heavy and cold against my legs. I pulled my backpack over my chest and started walking because standing still felt like dying. I didn't have a plan. Uncle Raymond lived somewhere in the city, but I didn't know the address. My best friend Mia's house was at least 6 miles away, and I wasn't even sure I could find it in the dark. So I just walked, staying under awnings when I could, pressing myself against buildings when the wind picked up and the rain came sideways. After the first hour, I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. After the second, my legs started shaking so badly, I had to stop every few blocks and lean against something solid. I found a bus stop bench and tried to rest, but a man in a stained coat sat down next to me and asked if I was looking for work, his eyes traveling over me in a way that made my skin crawl. I ran. I spent 20 minutes huddled under a highway overpass with 2 other people who didn't speak to me, just huddled in their own misery. When they started arguing about something, I left and kept walking. Past closed storefronts and dark houses and parked cars with alarms that screamed when I accidentally brushed against them. At some point I realized I was crying, but I couldn't tell anymore where the tears ended and the rain began. My teeth were chattering so hard I thought they might crack. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. The 7-Eleven appeared like a mirage, its fluorescent lights bleeding into the rain. I made it as far as the parking lot before my legs gave out. 1 second I was stumbling toward the entrance, thinking maybe I could get warm for just a few minutes, and the next I was on my hands and knees on the wet pavement, watching the world tilt and spin. I remember thinking that this was how I was going to die. 14 years old, and drowning on dry land while my father slept warm in his bed. Then everything went black. I woke up to bright lights and the smell of antiseptic. Someone was wrapping a blood pressure cuff around my arm and talking to me in a calm, steady voice that sounded like it came from very far away. "Jane, can you hear me? You're safe now. You're at Seattle General. My name is Marcus, and I'm a paramedic. You've been unconscious for about 20 minutes. I tried to sit up, but my whole body felt like it was made of lead. Marcus, a young Asian guy with kind eyes and purple gloves, gently pressed me back down onto the gurney.
Easy.
You're severely hypothermic and dehydrated. We need to get your core temperature up before you move around too much." He draped another heated blanket over me, and I realized I was shaking so violently the whole bed was rattling. The 7-Eleven clerk called 911 when he saw you collapse in the parking lot. You're lucky he was paying attention.
Lucky.
The word felt like a joke. I closed my eyes and felt hot tears sliding down my temples into my wet hair. Hey, look at me. Marcus moved into my line of sight, and his expression shifted from professional concern to something sharper. Jane, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to tell me the truth, okay? How did you end up outside in a storm like this? I opened my mouth to lie, to say I'd gotten lost or run away, or something that wouldn't make this worse than it already was. But looking at Marcus's face, at the genuine worry in his eyes, something inside me broke. My dad threw me out, I whispered. He thinks I destroyed my mom's things, but I didn't. My sister lied, and he believed her, and he told me I was dead to him. Marcus's jaw tightened. He glanced at the nurse who'd been checking my 4, and something passed between them, some silent communication I didn't understand. How long were you outside? I don't know. For hours, maybe. And these bruises on your arm. He carefully lifted the blanket to reveal the finger-shaped marks Dad's grip had left. Are these from tonight? I nodded. The nurse, her badge said Linda, came closer, and I saw her eyes traveling over me with the same clinical assessment Marcus had used. But she was looking at more than just tonight's damage. She was looking at the old bruises on my shins from when Brand had accidentally tripped me down the stairs last month. The healing cut on my temple from the textbook she'd thrown at my head. The way I automatically flinched when Linda reached toward me. "I'm going to call someone," Linda said quietly. "Someone who can help make sure you're safe." "My dad won't come anyway," I said, my voice breaking. He made that pretty clear. Marcus squeezed my hand through the blanket. "Good. Because after what you've told us, he's not getting anywhere near you. Brand wasn't always a monster. Or maybe she was, and I just couldn't see it when we were younger. When Mom was alive, Brand was the perfect daughter, straight A's, student council, volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. Mom used to joke that Brand had come out of the womb knowing exactly how to make adults fall in love with her. I was the opposite. Too quiet, too clumsy, too much living in my own head with my sketchbooks and charcoal pencils. Mom loved me anyway, but after she died when I was 9, the balance in our house shifted. Dad didn't know what to do with a daughter who cried too easily and forgot to brush her hair.
But Brand?
Brand knew exactly how to fill the empty space Mom left behind. She became his confidant, his helper, his reason to keep going. And I became the problem child. It started small. Brand would tell Dad I'd forgotten to do my chores when I hadn't. She'd eat my leftovers and say I must have finished them myself. She'd hide my homework and watch me panic looking for it, then find it at the last second and play the hero. Dad never questioned her. Why would he? She was Brand, the golden child who could do no wrong. By the time I was 12, Brand had perfected the art of making me look unstable. She'd pinch me under the table during dinner, and when I yelped, she'd look at Dad with this concerned expression and say I was having another episode. She convinced him I needed therapy. The therapist saw right through her, but Dad didn't want to hear it, so we stopped going. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Brand's perfect facade was crumbling. She'd started gambling her senior year of high school, just casual sports betting with friends. But by the time she was 23 and still living at home with no real job and a string of failed relationships, casual had become compulsive. Online poker, daily fantasy sports, casino apps on her phone that she could access 24/7. I'd hear her up at 3 in the morning, her thumbs flying across her screen, her face illuminated by that cold blue light. When I asked what she was doing once, she told me to mind my own business and slammed her bedroom door so hard a picture fell off the wall in the hallway. She was drowning in debt. $20,000 to credit cards she'd opened in secret. Another $15,000 to some guy she'd met at a casino who'd loaned her money with the kind of interest rate that came with threats. She'd already pawned her own jewelry, her laptop, anything she could liquidate without Dad noticing. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. So she looked at Mom's jewelry sitting in Dad's bedroom, untouched since the funeral. She looked at the trust fund Mom had set up for my education, the one Dad had mentioned just last week. And she made a choice. She chose herself. And she chose to destroy me in the process. I'd been in the hospital for 2 days when Uncle Raymond showed up. I barely remembered him. Mom's younger brother who'd moved to Portland after some family fight I'd been too young to understand. He'd sent birthday cards with $20 bills for a few years after Mom died, but Dad always threw them away before I could write back. Eventually they stopped coming. He walked into my hospital room like a man on a mission, all 6 feet 3 inches of him in a worn leather jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked so much like Mom it physically hurt to see him. Same dark curly hair, same sharp jawline, same way of looking at you like he could see straight through to your bones. "Jesus Christ, Jane," he said, and his voice cracked. "Look at you." I was still hooked up 2 and 4, still wrapped in heated blankets, even though my body temperature had finally stabilized. The CPS caseworker, a tired woman named Sharon, had been coming by twice a day to check on me and ask questions I didn't know how to answer. Where would I go when I was discharged? Did I have any other family? Was I afraid of my father? "How did you find me?" I asked. Raymond pulled a chair up next to my bed and sat down heavily. "Sharon called me." Apparently, I'm listed as your emergency contact in your school records from when you were in third grade. Your mom must have put me down before." He stopped, cleared his throat. "Before everything went to hell between me and Scott. Dad's going to be so mad." "I don't give a damn what Scott thinks." Raymond's voice went hard. He threw his 14-year-old daughter into a storm and left her to die. He doesn't get an opinion anymore. Over the next hour, Raymond laid out his plan like a general preparing for war. He'd already contacted a family law attorney in Seattle. He was filing for emergency custody based on abuse and neglect. He had a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland with a room that could be mine if I wanted it. He'd already called my school and explained the situation. "But there's something else," he said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Sharon told me about the jewelry, the frame-up. And I've known your sister since she was in diapers, Jane. I know how she operates. This wasn't some spontaneous tantrum. This was planned. She needed money," I said quietly. "I think she's been gambling. I've heard her on her phone at night, talking about debts." Raymond's expression went dark. "That's what I thought. So I called someone. A private investigator I've used before for background checks at my company. Her name is Lisa Park, and she's the best in the business. If Brand did what I think she did, Lisa will find the proof. What if there is no proof? What if it's just her word against mine?" Raymond took my hand, careful of the foreline. "Then we make sure it's not. Because I'm not letting you go back to that house, Jane. Not ever." Uncle Raymond just threw down the gauntlet, but Brand's web of lies runs deeper than anyone imagined. If you're wondering how a teenager with no power takes down someone who's been manipulating their entire family for years, stay subscribed, because the truth is about to come out in ways Brand never saw coming. Lisa Park didn't look like what I'd imagined a private investigator would look like. She was barely 5 feet tall, wore bright red glasses, and showed up at Uncle Raymond's Portland apartment 3 weeks after I'd been discharged with a messenger bag full of folders that would change everything. "Your sister isn't as smart as she thinks she is," Lisa said, spreading papers across Raymond's dining table like she was dealing cards. "People who commit crimes in the digital age always leave breadcrumbs. Always. They just don't realize how many." The first breadcrumb was surveillance footage from a pawn shop called Golden Eagle on the south side of Seattle. Lisa pulled out a printed screenshot and slid it across the table to me. There was Brand, clear as day, standing at the counter with Mom's jewelry box open in front of her. The timestamp read May 3rd, 2011, 1:47 p.m. 2 hours before I'd gotten home from school. "She got $1,200 for the lot," Lisa said. "The owner remembered her because she was crying, said it was a family emergency and she needed cash fast. He took her driver's license information for his records. Didn't even try to be subtle about it." Raymond leaned over my shoulder, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. "What else?" Lisa pulled out another folder. "Bank records. I had to call in some favors to get these, so let's just say they're off the record for now. Brand deposited the pawn shop money into her checking account that same afternoon. But here's where it gets interesting." She pointed to a series of withdrawals over the previous 6 months. "She's been hemorrhaging money, $300 to $500 at a time, sometimes multiple times a week." "Gambling debts," I said quietly. "Worse than that." Lisa pulled out printed screenshots from something called Players Club Elite. She's got accounts on 4 different online gambling platforms. This one shows she's lost over $18,000 in the last 8 months alone. And these, she tapped another set of papers, are credit card statements showing she's maxed out 3 cards trying to chase her losses. My hands were shaking. Seeing it all laid out like this, the systematic destruction of her own life, made something twist in my chest. Brand had been drowning, and instead of asking for help, she decided to drag me under with her. "There's one more thing," Lisa said, and her expression shifted to something almost apologetic. She pulled out a phone in a plastic evidence bag. This was in Brand's bedroom closet, hidden in a shoebox. "It's your phone, Jane. The one your dad thought you'd taken with you that night." I stared at it. My purple phone case, with the doodles I'd drawn on it in Sharpie. She sent herself text messages from your number, Lisa continued. Threatening messages, saying you were going to destroy the house and make her pay. She built a false narrative and then made sure there was digital evidence to support it. Brand hadn't just framed me. She'd tried to erase me completely. The call came on a Tuesday in late June. Raymond was making breakfast when his phone rang, and he answered it on speaker, so I could hear. It was Lisa, and she sounded like she'd just won the lottery. You're not going to believe this, she said. Remember that loan shark I mentioned in my report? The guy Brand owed 15 grand to? His name is Derek Voss, and he got picked up last night on felony drug distribution charges. Completely unrelated to our case. But here's the beautiful part. He's looking at 10 years minimum, and he's already started talking. Raymond set down his spatula. Talking about what? Everything. He gave up 3 of his dealers, 2 other loan clients, and your niece's sister. Apparently Brand wasn't just borrowing money from him. She was selling him stolen goods to pay down her debt. The jewelry was just the beginning. My stomach dropped. What do you mean the beginning? Lisa's voice softened. Jane, Brand's been systematically stealing from your father for at least a year. Small stuff at first, his tools, electronics he didn't use anymore, old coins from his collection. Voss has been acting as her fence, selling it all, and taking a 40% cut. When she ran out of things to steal without him noticing, she went after the jewelry. And when that wasn't enough to cover what she owed, she started planning to access your trust fund. The toast popped up in the toaster, but nobody moved to get it. I felt like I was underwater again, drowning on dry land just like that night in the parking lot. Voss is willing to testify. Raymond asked. He's desperate. His public defender has already reached out to the prosecutor about a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he'll provide documentation of every transaction he had with Brand, including text messages, bank transfers, and a list of items she sold him with dates and amounts. It's a prosecutorial slam dunk. Raymond's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chun, moved fast. Within a week, she'd filed a civil lawsuit against Brand on my behalf for theft, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She also contacted the police with Lisa's evidence and Voss's testimony, and by mid-July, Brand was facing criminal charges. I wasn't there when the police showed up at Dad's house with a warrant. Raymond wouldn't let me go, said I didn't need to see that. But Raymond's neighbor, who knew someone, told us that Brand had answered the door in her pajamas at 2 in the afternoon and actually tried to run when she saw the uniforms. They found more stolen items in her bedroom. Dad's vintage watch. Mom's silver candlesticks. Even the savings bonds Grandma had given me for my confirmation, which Brand had forged my signature to cash. The house of cards didn't just fall. It detonated. And this time, Brand had no one left to blame but herself. The civil hearing was held in courtroom 4B of the King County Courthouse on August 14, 2012. I sat between Uncle Raymond and Patricia, wearing a dress Raymond had bought me specially for the occasion, trying not to throw up from nerves. Brand sat across the aisle with a court-appointed attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, her cheekbones sharp under too much makeup that didn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. She didn't look at me once. Dad sat behind her, his hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead like he was made of stone. Part of me had hoped he'd sit on my side, that seeing all the evidence would wake him up to what Brand had done. But hope was a stupid thing to hold on to when it came to Scott Griffith. Judge Maria Santos called the court to order, and Patricia stood, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the bench. What followed was 2 hours of systematic destruction. Patricia walked the judge through every piece of evidence, like she was teaching a masterclass in fraud. The pawn shop surveillance, the bank records, the gambling accounts, the text messages Brand had sent from my phone, Derek Voss's signed testimony about the stolen goods. Brand's attorney tried to argue that she'd been under extreme emotional distress, that she'd made mistakes but hadn't intended to harm anyone. Patricia shut him down so fast I almost felt sorry for him. "Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "The defendant didn't make mistakes. She executed a calculated plan to steal from her minor sister, frame her for crimes she didn't commit, and manipulate her father into committing child endangerment. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was premeditated theft and abuse." Judge Santos looked at Brand over her reading glasses. "Ms. Griffith, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Brand stood up, wobbling slightly, and for a second I thought she might actually apologize. But then she opened her mouth and said, "She always got everything. Mom's attention, the trust fund, everyone feeling sorry for her because she was the baby. I was drowning and nobody cared." The judge's expression didn't change. "Sit down, Ms. Griffith." The ruling came swift and brutal. Brand was ordered to repay the $50,000 trust fund with interest, plus an additional $30,000 in damages for emotional distress. She was also ordered to complete a treatment program for gambling addiction and remain under probation for 3 years. Then Judge Santos turned her attention to my father. "Mr. Griffith, your failure to protect your minor child constitutes neglect under Washington state law. Emergency custody is hereby granted to Raymond Griffith, with supervised visitation only if Jane consents." Which I'm guessing she won't. Dad finally looked at me then. His eyes were red-rimmed and empty, and I realized he wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at a stranger who'd taken everything from him.
Good.
Let him feel what I felt that night in the storm. The email arrived on a Thursday in November 2025, 14 years after the storm that changed everything. I was sitting in my Seattle design studio, working on a logo for a nonprofit that helped homeless youth, when my phone buzzed with a notification I'd been half expecting for years. Subject line: "Please read this, Brand." My finger hovered over the delete button for a solid 30 seconds before curiosity won, and I opened it. The email was long, rambling, the kind of message someone writes at 3 in the morning when they're desperate and alone. Brand told me she was divorced, broke, living in a studio apartment in Tacoma, and working at a call center. She'd completed her court-ordered treatment but relapsed twice since then. Dad had died 2 years ago from a heart attack, and she'd been the only one at his funeral.
She was sorry. So sorry.
She understood if I hated her, but she was trying to be better, and she hoped maybe we could talk, maybe rebuild something, maybe find a way to be sisters again. The words "I never meant to hurt you" appeared 4 times. I read it twice, then set my phone down and stared out my studio window at the Seattle skyline. Rain was starting to fall, fat drops spattering against the glass, and for just a moment I was 14 again, soaked and shivering and convinced I was going to die alone. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was 28, running my own business, living in an apartment I'd designed myself. Uncle Raymond and I had dinner every Sunday. I had friends who knew my whole story and loved me anyway. I'd been in therapy for years and actually learned how to set boundaries, how to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate me, how to choose myself first. I opened my laptop and started typing a response. It poured out of me like poison I'd been storing for over a decade. I told Brand exactly what her lies had cost me.
The nightmares I still had about that storm.
The years of therapy to undo the damage of growing up convinced I was the problem. The relationship with our father I'd never get back, not that I wanted it anymore. I told her that sorry was just a word, and words had never meant anything in our family, only actions. And her actions had taught me everything I needed to know about who she really was. I wrote for 20 minutes, my fingers flying across the keyboard, tears streaming down my face. When I finished, I read it back twice. It was brutal and honest, and everything I'd ever wanted to say to her face. Then I highlighted all of it and hit delete. I closed my laptop, picked up my phone, and blocked Brand's email address without responding. Some people don't deserve closure. Some people don't deserve your energy or your pain, or your carefully crafted explanations of how they destroyed you. Some people just deserve silence. And finally, after 14 years, I was okay with that.